Thank you everyone for joining us today at here at the African Studies Department of the University of Vienna, but also on Zoom internationally. Yes, our presentation and talk today is on Zimbabwe and St. Lucia, heritage of African descendants in the Caribbean. And we are very happy to be able to welcome Ras Kella Wala today, a founding member of Zimbabwe Roots Farm in St. Lucia. As was already said, my name is Dominik Frühwirth. I'm a doctoral candidate at the Department of African Studies at the University of Vienna, and I'm also a graduate assistant at the School of Sacrament Rastafari University's SOSACRO Rastafari Studies Research Platform. So the idea is to give just a quick overview and context on the topic. I will try to move the Zoom as much as possible so that we see the slides. And just to give a quick introduction then for the talk so that we have the context for the talk, but of course the talk should be the focus and should take most of the time, and also at the end there is also of course the possibility for the audience here at the university, but also the audience on Zoom to ask questions. So to start with the geographical overview, why African heritage in the Caribbean is of course due to the transatlantic slave trade. Just a quick geographical overview, which is of course why Africans are now in the West, and the Caribbean is one of the biggest concentration of Africans in the West. And here, around here, we see St. Lucia in the Eastern Caribbean. The approach of my research at the African Studies Department here on my research topic, my PhD research is on Rastafari reasonings. This is the approach to contribute to decolonizing academic knowledge production. A central part of that is to listen to the people themselves that the academia studies about, and to include the voices themselves. That's why also we have this talk today, to hear what some of the protagonists themselves had to say. To give a little introduction, these are two quotes that I chose. One, of course, very famous by Bob Marley, and the second by Ras Brown, very important Rastafari elder from Jamaica. And just to give a little insight on Rastafari reasonings themselves and how Rastafari have usually positioned themselves, that is just some quick examples. Bob Marley said in 1979, we was taken from Africa as slaves, but we are Africans. Now you come to Jamaica and then take you to Jamaica, and today you must be Jamaicans or Americans. No, we refuse to be that. We are Africans. And Ras Brown, originally that quote is from the 60s. The Rastafarian is he who never will relinquish the fact that he is an African. Just as an example, when you approach the topic from the Rastafari reasonings themselves, what have Rastafarians to say about themselves? This is two very representative quotes. And then also a quick introduction, also because of my academic work on the topic is much facilitated through mobility studies. I'm also an associate researcher at the mobility studies research platform also here in Vienna. And mobility studies is against this ontology of distinct places and people, and but for a complex relationality of places and persons connected through performances. So it deconstructs this these more conservative views of places and people, and that they are very static, and it deconstructs these ideas, and that leads then to, for example, imaginative travel affected through talk, but also through images of places and peoples appearing on and moving across multiple print and visual media. So this is the people themselves. So even if they might be physically not able to be mobile, there's maybe a physical immobility, but still mobility studies helps us to understand these also as types of mobility. And third, the places themselves are seen as traveling, slow or fast, greater or shorter distances within networks of human and non-human agents. And when we talk about African heritage in the Caribbean, but also the African presence in the Caribbean, of course, is because of these points that mobility studies helps us academically to better understand. When we had before the Rastafari reasonings themselves, how do they define themselves as Africans? And they say we are not Jamaicans or St. Lucians or Americans, we are Africans. How is that possible, and how can that also academically be understood and analyzed? And mobility studies helps a lot on that way. And then I already want to go quickly into a historical overview, and that is, I just put that down quickly, that is Rex Nettleford, a quote from him, one of the most important sociologists from Jamaica, who did some of the most important work actually on Rastafari in Jamaica. And for him, he understood Rastafari as safeguarding the African presence. So that African presence that within Rastafari reasonings is very present. And as we see also now academically more and more, we are able to understand these reasonings through mobility studies. And so this safeguarding the African presence, I also try to give a quick historical overview, why and how does that apply, especially to St. Lucia. So St. Lucia was relatively late colonized in the 1640s. The Carib or indigenous population was resisting colonization long time. They called it, the Arawak original population called it Ayanola. The Carib population called it Hevanora. It both means the island of the Iguanua, the Insel der Leguane in German. And the island changed frequently between French and British. Some say 7 times French, 7 times British, and that has had a lasting legacy on the history of St. Lucia. By the 1660s, the Kalinago Caribs, the original inhabitants of St. Lucia, Ayanola, Hevanora, then left St. Lucia and left it basically to the colonialists. But some of them remained, and especially in Mount Mabuya, what then the French call La Sorcière. Mabuya or La Sorcière, that already shows the French approach. It means, it's translated as the witch or the sorcerer, because the Caribs went there, and it was very, the colonizers were afraid of it for various reasons, and that's why they called it La Sorcière. From the 1760s, enslaved Africans were brought to St. Lucia, even before that, but it was difficult to start the plantation colonization and plantation exploitation of the island. So it was then only in the 1760s, and already from that time on, enslaved Africans escaped. They were called in the Caribbean Maroons, and they joined then the Caribs in Mount Mabuya on La Sorcière, the La Sorcière mountain. And now you had together now the Caribs who still kept up resistance, and you had escaped formerly enslaved Africans, Maroons, who now joined with the Caribs. In 1814, after many times the island changed between French and British, finally the British permanently colonized St. Lucia. That's why also St. Lucia is now officially English-speaking country, but has still a strong French influence, not just only on the language, but also, for example, on Catholicism. The Catholic Church is very strong, although eventually it was a British colony. Then in 1834-38, the abolition of slavery in the British colonies, and that also then brought Africans directly from the continent. We also have this, for example, in Jamaica, where Africans from the Congo region, Angola region, they brought kumina and directly from the continent. And we also have a similar phenomenon in St. Lucia, where Africans directly from the continent were brought to St. Lucia, and they now strengthened that African presence in Mount Mabuya, La Sorcière. Then from the 1930s, so about 100 years after the abolition of slavery, Rastafari developed in Jamaica. And then from the 1970s, especially, some say maybe already starting in the 1960s, but especially from the 1970s, Rastafari spread in St. Lucia. And in 1979, St. Lucia became independent quite late. And from the 1980s, we then have in the same region again, Mount Mabuya, La Sorcière region, that now Rastafari were now also taking refuge in a way in the same space where already the Carib kept up resistance, where then escaped Maroons kept up resistance, where then Africans who came directly from the continent also joined and kept up resistance, and Rastafari basically kept up that tradition in the Mount Mabuya, La Sorcière region. And as of the 2001 census in St. Lucia, 2.1% of St. Lucia's population are reported as Rastafari. And that's to give a quick historical overview for orientation, and then also maybe later for asking questions to follow up and also to follow the conversation. It might be good to have first a geographical overview and context, but also the historical overview. Then just quickly, map of St. Lucia, and here we also see the Ras Kella mountain. It is basically opposite from the capital Castries. That is that region where I was talking about from already the Caribs from the 17th century, and then also Africans from afterwards were joining them and kept up resistance in that region. So that is a very has a very strong tradition of resistance. Now we want to show a quick clip from 1984-85. It was broadcast in 1986. The Austrian national television was making a documentary about St. Lucia in the 1980s, and it was then shown on Austrian television in 1986. So I will quickly stop sharing and share the documentary. And it is just that the whole documentary was about different projects back then in St. Lucia, also with especially different university projects. And the end of the movie, kind of the highlight of the movie, was then the Rastafari community in La Sorcière mountain, Mount Mabuya. And especially it came about because of an important Austrian scholar whose name was Manfred Kremser, Dr. Manfred Kremser. He did the initial research there. He is also interviewed in the movie, in the documentary. You will see him. Unfortunately for our English-speaking audience, it is of course a German-speaking document. It is just about 7 minutes. It will still give those a good visual overview and a visual insight about in that region. It was actually then when the Zimbabwe Roots Farm was already relocated to Bobonu, but was still in the Sorcière region. And just for those who can't follow the German, to give a quick overview, it shows Rastafari farming there, and basically the important key essence is what also Manfred Kremser in there says, and what is the analysis, that the farming there is to prepare to go back to Africa. So the farming was basically to train and then to farm in Africa for a liberated Africa that is all connected, that we will then also talk about in the discussion. So not to take any longer, we will show the movie. Enjoy, everyone.
Ein Ausdruck auf ein Problem unserer zivilisierten Welt suchen einige Aussteiger, die in das Sorcière ein Stück Land bebauen. Es sind Rastas, kämpfliche Bilder und Remarken. Aber kein jeder Mensch wollte Rastas, die kommen zu sich an und die Abhängigkeiten der Zivilisation genießen wollen. Wir scheinen an dem alten Testament zu leben. Sie begründen die Zivilisation als ein Werk des Volkes und bezeichnen sie als Vater, dessen Untergang bereits 7 Jahren schon an der Wand steht. Nicht die geistige Reinheit, mit denen wir leben. Sie vermeiden alle Worte, die mit Kasten eines Lebens zu tun haben. Sie versuchen, die Einleitung der Natur wiederzufinden. Die Mütter sind einfach, die sind ihre Bitten und ihre Lebensweise. Auch beim Essen sind sie kompromisslos. Sie essen nur selbst angebautes und lehnen jede Nahrung tierischer Wirkung ab.
Die Frage an den Ökonomen, Dr. Kremser, was ist bereits die Geburt einer neuen Mission eines Plans?
Es ist ein neuer Versuch von einer Gruppe von Menschen, die aus der Gesellschaft, aus der üblichen karibischen Gesellschaft sich mehr oder weniger freiwillig ausschließen und hier ein neues Leben zu beginnen. Ein neues Leben ist daran nach den Prinzipien, so wie Gott die Welt und den Menschen geschaffen hat, der im Einklang mit der Natur leben soll. Die historischen Gründe reichen Jahrhunderte zurück. Wir müssen denken, dass die Staatenbewohner der Karibik vor Jahrhunderten als Sklaven von ihrer Heimat entrissen wurden in eine neue Welt voll Feindseligkeit, Sklavenarbeit, beherrscht sind durch Sklavenherren, in ein neues System gekommen sind, welches nicht nach den durchschnittlichen Lebenserwartungen ausgerichtet war. Es gab historisch wenige Proteste gegen diese Vergangenheit, und der Protest, der vielleicht gewurzelt in der Bewegung der Kinder, war Marcus Garvey, ein Führer, ein Vorläufer der jetzigen Rastafari-Bewegung, der in Jamaika und 1920 herum gewirkt hat, ist der erstmals den Mut zurück nach Afrika erfinden hat lassen. Und an diesen Mut haben sich dann im Laufe der Jahrzehnte Tausende und Zehntausende von schwarzen Menschen in der Karibik angeschlossen. Und sie träumen ein Leben, welches sie in ihrer Heimat leben würden, in ihrer Heimat Afrika. Sie träumen ein Leben fern von der Heimat und machen sich ihre Vorstellungen über diese Heimat Afrikas.
Sie sind überzeugt, dass ihre Lebensweise das einzig mögliche Problem für eine Rückkehr in den paradiesischen Urzustand ist.
Was du dann liest,
The educational point of the world in all life.
Die Gegensätze, gibt es Trennungen, gibt es Zerstörungen, aber auch alle Akten von Divisionen. Wir müssen uns vor Augen halten, unsere Tradition besteht darin, dass wir trotz allem weitermachen. Manche Leute akzeptieren unsere Lebensweise nicht. Sie können die Realität nicht akzeptieren, so wie sie ist. Wenn sie zu uns kommen, müssen wir sie lernen, das Leben so zu betrachten, wie wir das tun.
Obviously, there is look at you. Was wir auch mit denken, wie können wir von Situation. Gibt es auch Farm? Actually, this ambition for a lot of attention.
Natürlich, und seine Umstände durch jede Menge fahren. In dem Raster lebt die göttliche Stimmung. Die Leute merken es nicht. Ihre Gedanken sind voll von Spannungen, kämpfen und Stress. Und dadurch kommt die Sünde über den Menschen.
Wie ist das? Kann man diese besuchen?
Nein, wir sind sehr zurückgezogen. Ich glaube, Ihre Gruppe ist die erste, die wir so nahe an dieser Allianz machen. Wenn Leute kommen, ziehen wir uns in den Wald zurück. Wir wollen keinen Kontakt mit Touristen. Ja, nicht mit diesem System, das wir Babylon werden. Das heißt aber nicht, dass wir überhaupt keinen Kontakt zu anderen haben. Ich als Sprecher unserer Gruppe rede manchmal mit anderen Leuten. Wir sind sehr zurückgezogen. Auch auf grünen Beweise versuchen die Rastas, eine Konsumaskete zu praktizieren, eine Verzichthandlung, die eine Art ökologische Experiment gründet. Es viele andere Menschen aus der Lucia empfinden sie als absurd. Doch stellen sie nur eine extreme Minderheit dar. Outsider, die auf die Jünger ihrer Landsleute relocated. Die Anliegen des Konsumglaubens halten ihre andere Lebensauffassung für die einzig richtige. Sie will den Abschieden, der im Gegensatz zu den Anthesen und konfliktierenden Zielen.
So we see 1986 on Austrian television. So from even before I was born, a young Ras Kella Wala was speaking on Austrian television in 1986, and we are very happy to welcome him today here so that we can talk with him directly and also can ask him questions. I just want to quickly also show again what I forgot to mention in the very beginning here. On the right, you also see Ras Kella Wala at Zimbabwe Roots Farm. So now we go into our conversation. Yes, And we will turn our camera a bit for our conversation. I hope we are well heard on Zoom still. I think so. If anything, please just let us know. We're not well heard. Welcome again, Ras Kella Wala. Thank you very much for joining us for this talk today. It's very exciting to see you not only on this documentary from the 1980s, but to have you in person with us to talk about Zimbabwe Roots Farm, the African presence in St. Lucia, and also then for our audience to have be able to ask questions directly to you and to talk to you. I will start with a few questions so we get into it. Just need time. And I think we have until 7, right?
Yeah, I think nobody counts.
Okay. So I will start with a few questions and then we will open the floor. So thank you again for joining us today, the audience here, the audience in Zoom, especially Ras Kella Wala. Ras Kella.
Thank you very much. Before can I take over?
Yes, please.
Thanks very much. Before any question, I would like to say thanks very much to welcome me. I'm very moved. I must stand up ovation for Austria, for Vienna, and for university students, especially Black African or Black history of African history. Thank you for the Institute. Thank you, Dominik. Thank you, Bridget. Yeah, thanks very much. And a pleasant welcome to our participants. I will not call you an audience, we call you participants because we are doing something today together. I'm very proud to see your gender join. We have male and female, they are well balanced. Thank you very much. Every individual, you are welcome. It's not numbers, but it's members. We are not large in number, but I find we are very strong in heart, and I'm very proud to see you present today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I would like to start out, Ras Kella. You told me once that you have even legally changed your name, Kella Wala, from your legal St. Lucian name to an African name. Why have you changed your name? And maybe you can give us maybe when was that and some of the background that came up to that.
Yes, thanks very much for an interesting question, which I didn't thought would even be part of African history. But to start, by day one, when the Rastafarian landed in St. Lucia in the late 60s, early 70s, when I say landed, Rastafarian is something that we consider we inherit, just like we're talking of heritage. Rastafarian is African people, African culture, African religion, but we, the people in the Caribbean, we didn't grow up as Rasta. We grew up from the colonial masters, from other traditional behaviors, colonial and African traditional, but the Rastafarian was not in that time in the circulation. The Rastafarian grew up from 1930 and they started practicing late in the 40s, 50s in Jamaica and became located to St. Lucia in the 60s, 70s. But Rastafarian are Africans, and that's why I would say the African itself is in us in blood. And because of being a Rastafarian, seeing the movement, the name I had as Michael William, I consider that was an adopted name for the colonial master because we was named after our colonial master's name. And because of the Rastafarian identifying it as an African, I wanted to change this official name, Michael William, to an African name, that at least one day, if I would become an African, that I would be called an African. So that was the main reason why I changed the name into Africa. Kella Wala means Alpha and Omega. I didn't want to be like God, beginning without the end. But if I'm the son, I can carry the father's title. So I wanted to be a good man, and I consider, well, Kella Wala means beginning without end, Alpha and Omega. And it was registered. I started the movement early in the 77, 78. And from day one, I started consulting my lawyer. And it took me 3 to 4 years before I could get it done, because I had to be surveyed, surveillance, control, why I want to change my name, am I a criminal, why this name has to be pronounced in our language, in our culture. There was a list of reasons why I had to wait for 3 years to controlling me and still wanting to know if I wanted to do it until I get it done after 4 years from the start.
And so when you changed your name to an African name, it was something unheard of, or did you know other people who also did it, or how was it?
At that time in our country, it was a handful of people that might have changed their name, because change of name was very restricted and demanding. And if those that have changed their name, it might still have been into a colonial name. There might be people who have done it before, but not as an African name, because that's why I had difficulties that this name can be pronounced in our language, in our so-called Ethiopian, American calendar, and this kind of American languages pronunciation. We are under the British law, so in school. So all these had to be said that this language and the name suit for the society of St. Lucia. So the name itself was a very adopted name, and which is not common. I think that no one ever had this name before. So I had to go through a lot of experiences with my own self and with my belief and my so-called God or Jah or belief. Why do I really have to do it? Is it a must and is it a need? And I keep processing doing it till I succeed. And up to today, everywhere worldwide, my name is called Kella Wala.
Thank you very much. And as we have seen already when you were on Austrian TV in the 1980s, it was already Kella Wala, although they misspelled it a bit, but it was already Kella Wala on Austrian TV in 1986. So does that mean that the identification with Africa was not so strong in St. Lucia at that time, so that there was not so much understanding for changing the name to an African name, or how was the background?
The identification names, in terms of, a lot of us have surnames or nicknames in St. Lucia. And a lot of the nicknames are African names, African pronunciation, because the language in our is a mixture of Africans, different Africans, and French, and a mixture of English. So everyone had a third name, and their third name would be an African name, but it wouldn't be an official name. It would just be community name or home name, but not an official name. But African names were a lot of African names were very formal in St. Lucia at that time.
Yeah, okay. But not for legally changing it. That was something new.
No, that was new, and especially, as I said, those who might have done it. I can remember my lawyer was telling me that this second case, and he didn't even completed the first one, but there might have been 1 or 2 individuals who did it before, and would have been very important people for international citizenship reasons. It was diplomatic people that would do things like that, and at that time, it was not easy for a simple Rastaman countryside person going into the city and decide he want to change his name from state to state, from title to title, from country to country, and adapting a new name. So it was a very hard task for me.
And you said your involvement with Rastafari was basically strengthening that identification with Rastafari. So maybe you already mentioned from the 1970s, Rastafari also spread in St. Lucia, but maybe you can give a quick overview to the audience. What is actually meant when you speak about Rastafari, and how did that contribute to that strengthening of African identities?
Again, we'll come back to the front again, because Rastafarian is African. So whatsoever the Rastafarian groups say, wherever they go, it's Africa, they promote it. Is Africa, we put it on the map, is Africa, we try to liberate. So the Rastafarians, I could say, are those people who make the world recognize how important Africa is, how important history for African people. Because I myself in school, I didn't get, when you would have African history, there was nothing but about history, African history. We would have history, but only history about Columbus, history about Paul Morgan, Henry Morgan, and all this kind of pirate guys. Columbus, we could sing God Save the Queen, but we never could sing any of the African traditional songs. So all the Rastafarian was very feeling sorry for themselves, because most of the African things we could not practice it, we couldn't inherit. Even our native language, which is the Creole, which was forbidden at school and things like that. If your parents want you to learn and have a very good school, they will tell you, don't speak Creole, because that's an African language and it's not a language, it's just a slang. So we, the Rastafarian people, are those people who always try to put Africa on the front line before us, and we follow. So because of the Rastafarian, I myself start recognizing what Africa is, because most of my life I have been living 3/4 of my life as Rastafarian. I can even say mostly the things I knew I inherit from my colonial masters, from religion, Catholic, for bad practices, which was not belonging to Africa. All these things are European attitude, behaviors, rituals, and beliefs. So the Rastafarian, whenever we talk about Africa, since the Rastafarian came in, they are the pioneers of bringing Africa to where Africa is today.
And so then you said, I remember that shortly afterwards, already in the late 70s, when you started to identify with Rastafari, you would go then up from your village of Jasse up into La Sorcière mountain with other Rasta brethren, and you started farming. And that place was called Zimbabwe. And the farm that you started then there was called Zimbabwe Roots Farm. How did that come about? Why a place? People might ask why a place in the Caribbean is called Zimbabwe, and what was the whole idea behind it?
Thank you very much again. Then I'll give a history about Zimbabwe. Thanks very much to talk about Zimbabwe Roots Farm after almost 37 years making a documentation, and now I'm sitting in the middle of Vienna talking about history. That proves that history has been written itself, and history has been living. History is not going to a book, read some information and put it aside. History is something that you learn and you practice it, you put it to existence, and it keeps going. And history takes a long period of time before it becomes history. So we ourselves, and little advice on you, those who are students, those who are studying, those who are professors, those who are doctors, anything you do, anything you study, anything you would like to do in life, it doesn't come overnight. It's how long you last and how long it can continue. But history itself is one of the longest subjects in life to become a reality. And now I realize Zimbabwe Roots Farm has become a reality, because I can sit, after 27 years, I can sit in Vienna and talk about it. Zimbabwe Roots Farm was developed during the redemption time when the Rastafarians start exploding in St. Lucia. Early 80s, after Bob Marley died, I could say the whole world felt there was a tendency of something missing. And a lot of brethren who was neutral, who was seeing life, who was understanding the society, could see the only way is to come on and strengthen Rastafarian. So a lot of brethren start putting on dreadlocks, trying back to creation, talking about Africa, looking up to the Rastafarian. And then the Zimbabwe Roots Farm start getting more members. Like, we was just a handful, 3 of us who started Zimbabwe Roots Farm. It was I, King, and Chikalot. I was the first one who had a dreadlocks among all of us. I put on the dreadlocks in 1978, lived with them all together. In 1981, they themselves become having dreadlocks, and we decide, as Rastafarian, as Africans, we have to train ourselves, we have to be prepared for Africa, we have to go back to Africa, because St. Lucia is just a little island, that's not our property, that's not our homeland. But while we are there, we have to make use of ourselves, train ourselves to be good agriculturists. So when we go to Africa, we'll feed Africa, because the only thing we heard of Africa is poverty, starvation, bad stories. So we always consider, as St. Lucia, let's prepare ourselves. So when we go back to Africa, we'll be prepared and feed ourselves and feed our brothers and sisters. So Zimbabwe Roots Farm was a revolution to bring back people to eat what you grow what you eat, be vegetarian, be eater, and have a good life, have a good diet, have a balanced life. And especially at this time, the Rastafarian, the only opportunity they had was the land, because the government was refusing us every job, and we didn't have a job, any opportunity to have a job as a teacher or any official jobs once you had the dreadlocks. So every Rastaman, the first priority was back to the land. And in this time, the government was going into a revolutionary propaganda saying, eat what you grow what you eat, self-consumption, break down cost of food imports. So the government had a very high slogan, and it was the Rastafarian who uphold these slogans stronger, because we were the farmers, we are the vegetarians, we are the one who eat it, and we are the one who. So the government had to embrace this side of the Rastafarian, because we were hard workers, we were stealing the soil, and we were preaching back to creation, back to roots, back to vital. So the Zimbabwe Roots Farm went to the Sorcière, where this always was the rescue areas from the Arawaks, from the Caribs, from the Maroons, and it still was that same place where the Rasta had to go, because that was the reserved area, the most pure virgin land area, and the Rasta wanted to be in an organic area, natural land. So we went and squat in the reserved areas. It was forbidden because this is the water resource area. We knew that, but we was practicing moderate. But after 3 years, the government decided we cannot be there. They chased us out, they came with police, they eradicated the whole housing and burned some of the other things, and we went back into the village. And then we decide to continue our action, and we plead from the government to allow us to get us land that we can continue the practices, what we was doing in the hills somewhere else. So then we was in negotiation with the government, and then we started developing Zimbabwe Roots Farm as an initiative, as an alternative for farming, an alternative for employment, an alternative for the Rastafarian community. So the government realized what we was doing was very strong and very demanding, very good practices, and because the slogan was back to roots, eat what you grow. So the government started helping Zimbabwe, obtaining land, trying to get funding, trying to get organizational structure, so we could develop Zimbabwe Roots Farm as an institute to practice agriculture, organic farming, head schools, and then it was successful. Then in between this time, Dr. Kremser, I must say, at that time, get to know us because he was doing some documentary in the University of Vienna. I must say, I will take 15 seconds peace silent for him because he's dead for now, so I should as with words. Why I do so thanks very much for Kremser, because he was one of the most inspiring spiritual scientists I ever met. I don't describe him as an anthropologist or as a historian, I just describe him as a spiritual scientist for human being. Because the way he was able to understand the Zimbabwe Roots Farm, the kind of restrictions we had, the kind of provocation we had towards white people or society, and he was able to still humble and make himself understood that he could face the group to have this documentation done with us and things like that. And now today I can even sit in Vienna and talk about it. I must say congratulations for him, because that was a very hard task for he as a professor at that time. Zimbabwe Roots Farm was mainly developed to strengthen we as the Rastafarian, as a cult, as a group, to be self-reliant and to help the government into extensional projects like educational programs, going to schools, do training organic farming, agricultural practices. And it was successful from day one when we started. From 1985, 86, we started getting funding. 86, 87, we was having school activities. I was working in 5 different schools. The government was using me as one of the representatives for most of the agricultural organization. We had extension projects, inter-island projects also, Dominik, Caribbean islands, also Barbados, because there was this Caribbean conference of farmers organization during the Caribbean unity in the 86, 87, 88. That time the Caribbean, we used to only carry our own passports and Dominica or Barbados, but now we have the Caribbean community. And at this time, the Caribbean was developing this Caribbean community union. And I had to represent St. Lucia on different occasions. Even at one time, I can mention there was a very critical situation in Dominica, a neighboring island, where I had to participate in a governmental agricultural extension program. And I was representing government of St. Lucia, and the government of Dominica wanted to deport me, because in Dominica there is a Dread Act on so-called the Rastafarian community, which is a very sad story, where this country was not allowing anybody with a dreadlocks to enter the country. And at that time, I was one of the first person to go through Dominica with a dreadlocks under that act. And I did it because I was on government officials and they didn't want to deport me, or else if they would deport me, they would break down the agenda or the regulations of Caribbean community. So it was forced that I even went there a second time. So I represented St. Lucia twice in Dominica on that Dread Act on the Rastafarian community. The Rastafarian community is one of the few community. I don't want to stress so much on Rastafarian, but as I said, because history, the Rasta, we cannot depart them from each other. Rasta and history is the same, and I only can talk about Rasta. The Rastafarian community is the community that has been helping individual persons be proud of themselves, be more loving to yourself, don't commit crime, try to, the Rastafarian community make every human being be more proudful of themselves, be more brave, be more educational. All of us, now we are using technology, like, I must say thanks for those participating in Zoom or whosoever, that we have all these technologies now, 30 years ago, if you wanted to know something, you would have to sit in a university for 6-7 days a week before you would know if the world is round, But now you just take your goggles and you Google on your smartphone and you can prove to Kella, you lie, you didn't come from St. Lucia, you come from Dominica, Now, the kind of things we have access to now is not like when we are talking, like when you have to scratch from 30 years ago, 37 years ago when I started. It's now 45 years I'm seeing Rastafarian, and I tell you, from seeing Rastafarian and see the kind of development where we are up today, I'm very proud to see that we, the world, we have written history, and history will repeat itself after we have done it.
Thank you. And now you mentioned that even then, even when the Dread Act was in force in Dominica, where many Rasta were persecuted just for being Rasta. So you were already working for the government, and that basically made them have to respect you, even though you were dreadlocks back then already entering the country. But I remember also that when you told me that when you started to identify with Rastafari, that actually what made you interested is because the society was actually more against them. For example, I remember you told me they would always say Rasta can't climb hill, and then you realized all the Rasta living in the hills and farm, and you realized it's not so, it's not true. So how did that happen? This basically, maybe as you just explained, over 10 years from the mid-70s to the mid-80s, where you then as a Rasta were working for the government or sent on a mission to represent the Central government. How did that come about, that change of how government and society saw Rastafari, and how did projects like Zimbabwe Roots Farm, or there were other farms also, and all of them connected to Africa, like Africa Roots Farm, there was Angola Farm, there were different Africa-centered farms. How did that contribute to how the government and how society saw Rastafari in St. Lucia, or maybe even in the region, Eastern Caribbean?
As I mentioned before, again, the Rastafarian is the history, the Rastafarian are the people, and the Rastafarians are the Africans. Whatsoever St. Lucia would do at that time, and they couldn't leave out the Rasta, because there was always the voluntary workers who were prepared to take any good idea and to make it a good existing plan. The agriculture area, as I said, it was being forced because we were at that time the most interested in practicing agriculture. The people in St. Lucia, they would practice agriculture more for commodities or marketing product, other things, but not for self-consumption. But the Rasta was taking it more like a lifestyle, like a tradition, like a culture, but not just for agricultural purposes, for marketing or economic purposes. So we had priority, the government had to be forced because a lot of us were very good. Most of that time, we had very good engineers who was dreadlocks, who studied in Jamaica. And some of these brethren, they came back and they had a job with the government. It was a very hard time to get the government to balance with the Rasta, but it was like a demand. Both sides needed a petition, like we the Rasta needed the government to moderate the situation with us. And the government needed us because we had a lot of input in terms of our ideas and practices. So during the time the Rastafarian was just self-employed, working for themselves, the government realized, well, they have to strengthen community projects. So a lot of the brethren, different villages always had a group of brethren. So they would create their own self-employed community projects, and the government would start looking at it as a small area of diversification. In this diversification program, the government was very much interested in developing the area, and every area they would go, the strongest active group would still be a Rastafarian group. So it was forced that the government had to embrace it, and a lot of us had good ideas of going through the government, getting training, talking about diversification, improving, bringing new crops like soybean, rice, the Plenty Canada would support the Roots Farm. So we had a lot of international agencies giving us good support and plans and ideas till we were able to get funding from a Canadian agency, the Zimbabwe Roots Farm, got a good amount of money at that time, but we got equipment and things like that. And our duty was to provide the schools with these, whatsoever we grow, whatsoever we harvest, we share it with the schools. We provide the schools with the know-how, the material, planting material. And at one time, we had 5 schools as demonstration plots for agriculture with the government. The Zimbabwe Roots Farm was one of the first so-called agricultural institutions to represent government on international affairs in terms of working with the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Culture, and Ministry of Agriculture. This 3 ministries all together on one program. So the Zimbabwe Roots Farm after a while was well known by the government because we uphold our testimonies, like keeping up our agricultural practices, keeping up our behaviors, keeping up our morals, and we was creating self-employment within the village. So the government was somehow bound and obliged to accept us, and we was moderate to humble. But as I said, there was restriction. I was always a moderate person who could deal with the society, and some brethren had restrictions, but we would always get a reasonable person, someone resource person who can handle the ministry or handle the government. So I was a mediator between my Rasta people and the government. So it was a little hard, but it was difficult just to be able to push both sides, because one side the government wanted to demand that, and the other side the Rasta is relaxing, but they are very active and potential people. But if they say yes to something, they do it. So sometimes it was very hard for me, because I would rather always be in peace, and I had to be always in the meetings, in the conferences, in the sometimes ceremonies or workshops with the ministry. So even sometimes it was very demanding for me, leaving my peace. I didn't have much time sometimes even for the agriculture itself. I had more time for weekly officials more than the land at certain times, which was very demanding for me, but we was able to success. We were successful, we did it. The government was pleased, the funding agency was pleased, and the schools was pleased. And up to now, I think even Austria has been pleased with what Zimbabwe Roots Farm has been doing.
Yes, thank you very much. A last question before we open up the floor for questions from here and also from Zoom. So please, if you have questions, maybe there are already some in the chat. Now, you said from the beginning, the whole idea of Zimbabwe Roots Farm, it was not just to call it a name, an African name, but the idea was always to one day go to Africa. And back then you've already worked with the Red Cross, you still work with the Red Cross in Austria, and now since the last years, you've also been working with the Red Cross in Ethiopia. So for a Rasta, of course, the greatest thing is to go to Ethiopia, not just to visit, but even to do works there. And you have just returned now at the beginning of this month from your latest project with the Red Cross in Ethiopia. And maybe you can give us also a quick overview on not just the works that you have been doing there, but also what that means for somebody who has basically done development work in the name of Africa already in St. Lucia, and then really making that way to Ethiopia itself to do development works there also.
Thanks very much. I must say again, thanks to St. Lucia, my country. Thanks to Austria too, because Austria is the mediator between Africa and St. Lucia to me. And thanks to my family who gave me good courage and support to be able to realize my voluntary work in Ethiopia. What I'm doing in Ethiopia now is the second cap from Zimbabwe Roots Farm. It's like Zimbabwe Roots Farm was my first cap to enter Africa, to start preparing myself for Africa from 1978. And what I'm doing now in Africa now, which I started from 2003, is the second cap of Africa. I'm doing a voluntary worker international for the Red Cross, and I have been visiting Ethiopia for 4 times now. And I'm doing a lot of educational programs, first aid programs with the Ethiopian Red Cross in 2 cities, Shashemene and Nawasa. And I'm also doing some small funding for agricultural projects. I have been supporting school students for the past 10 years. I have been supporting a private school in the Shala Lake area, where, to elaborate on it, there is one school and there is the age range between 7 and 14. One school, one class, one teacher, and the age range is 7 to 14. So all these children are in one class. So I had a very good heart to that school. I wanted to continue, but this school, since COVID, this school is closed, I think, and I'm not too sure even if it will be open anymore, which is a broken heart. My voluntary work with the Red Cross in Ethiopia is still part, as I always feel myself as an African. When I came to Europe in 2003, I felt I'm just passing through Europe. Europe is not my country. I don't feel like Europe is one of the best places to be, but since I am there, I was there voluntarily, I'm living there. So I decided I want to become a member of the Red Cross International because I have been a voluntary worker with the Red Cross in St. Lucia. I was coordinator for disaster management in St. Lucia. So when I came to Austria, I wanted to develop some more humanitarian educational program dealing with human beings, because before my main aim was agriculture. I did love agriculture because the plants, they don't talk back, they don't quarrel with you. So when I came to Austria, I decided, okay, agriculture, let me give that a break and start dealing with human beings. So I went into the human resources and educational social life of the Red Cross. I went through some training and developed the program. I then decided, let me go to Africa now and give back all this training, all these education programs which the Red Cross offer me here, and a lot of good opportunities I got here for free, sometimes free of charge. So I say I have to give these things in return to Africa. And since 2014, I have been going to Africa every period of 2 years or 3 years and developing this educational program and training in Ethiopia. And I'm feeling like it's still the same thing I have been doing with Zimbabwe Roots Farm. It's just that I divert the ability from agriculture into man culture or educational culture.
And of course, one of the places that you've mentioned where you primarily work, Shashemene in Ethiopia, is famously the place that Emperor Haile Selassie gave for Black people of the world through the Ethiopian World Federation to repatriate to Africa. So it's a special place also for people returning to Africa, and it was meant to participate in the development of the continent. So this is where you do your work there.
Yes, and why I chose this area again with the Rastafarian again, the Rastafarian community is Shashemene, the village that's the land on earth that was donated or given to so-called the Caribbean hemisphere people, whom and abroad Selassie was, and it was a treaty between Selassie and the Rastafarian. So I chose to do some projects or do that particular work in that area, because if that's the land, if that's the location, why not that area? There are other parts in Ethiopia that is more convenient or even more relaxing to work, but Shashemene is a real ghetto and real hard life area, so I rather go the hardest rough way. So I decided to work in Shashemene, which is called the West Aroma region. And I was welcome this year. I got a great letter of an award certificate from them for recommending my good works with them for the past years, thanks for them. So I'm feeling proud that at least from Caribbean to Austria, right into Ethiopia, that at least I have been to Ethiopia and still trying to do works while I'm alive. Wherever I am, I feel I'm an African and I feel I'm in an Ethiopian, woman abroad.
Thank you very much. So now we will open up the floor for questions. I will also check in the chat if we have questions, but maybe already here with the audience. If there are questions, please take the opportunity. Yes, please.
A question about Mount Mabuya. As you said, you don't like tourists, I understand that. Still, I would like to know if it is possible to learn in the people there how to live self-sufficient. Like, I'm very interested in that kind of thing, because I like to learn how to live without money, because I think the money system is very bad and is enslaving the people, which is why I would like to learn how to live without it. My plan would be to learn it if it is possible there for a few years, for a decade, whatever, how long it would take. Then go into Africa, especially to Gambia, buy some land, open a farm, teach people, the locals there, how to learn the solution. Maybe it spreads this knowledge, if that's possible.
Okay, first of all, I will tell you, as I said before, history is something that is living, it's living, but it takes years before it becomes history. And sometimes things that could be history can be destroyed in a matter of days. This same holy hill, the Ras in the Mabuya Valley, where the government chased the Rasta away from. Now they are having cable cars taking tourists up there. So if you understand that, this same holy area is no more holy as it was. When it comes to self-reliance, the agricultural practices I could practice 30, 40 years in St. Lucia, I cannot practice that anymore. The land has been deteriorated, the water is low, the agricultural practice is bad. A lot of agricultural planting materials been lost. The people has been losing their culture. You know, people are adopting the world in a speedy life, like what was possible 40 years ago, relax and easy, it might not be possible anymore. I lived 12 years in the Ras Kella region area without eating and drinking or using anything I would have to buy. From toothpaste, salt, sugar, pepper, anything, flour, once you would have to buy it, we was living a life where we didn't have to use or buy money. I cannot practice that anymore in solution. Or if I can do it, just me alone, but not like a community or a big group of, you understand? Because the same things that was possible 20, 40 years ago, the resources or even the energy, the courage, the power that was there, human beings don't have this kind of resources and power and faith and belief anymore. And the world sometimes don't even permit this thing because of international laws and because where I would be able to live 40 years ago, like in the last Sorcière and now is a tourist cable car taking you over. I hope that
I understand.
But just to mention on this, the Zimbabwe Roots Farm itself still exists. And also just to mention, since I'm also representing the School of Sacrament Rastafari University, we have our summer school this summer in St. Lucia, and it is close to the Sorcière region. It might be now a bit short notice, but we also have a hybrid leg of the summer school, and we can talk about this also. You might be interested to maybe start to make some connections for your own interest.
And to tell you, the Zimbabwe Roots Farm still exists. The Zimbabwe Roots Farm now is located in Debara, and now we have families, children. Before it was just a group of men, now we have families, mothers, children, and it's a family living there now. But the Zimbabwe Roots Farm itself had different locations. We have been shifting from locations to location. So if you mention of Zimbabwe Roots Farm in the Mabuya, Ras Kella area, or if you mention Zimbabwe Roots Farm in the Babolo area, or if you mention Zimbabwe Roots Farm in the Debara area or on the estate, because we have been shifting locations with our history. But the Zimbabwe Roots Farm, the idea is still existing under the Debara, which is the lot, which is from an estate where we was squatting.
And when you say estate, it means former slave plantation.
Former slave plantation, real estate. So
that is also quite a heavy history when we think of that in terms of liberation and resistance, that now Zimbabwe Roots Farm has reclaimed basically land from a former slave estate, slave plantation.
Well, I just wanted to say there are two questions in the chat. Perhaps, Dominik, if you want to come here and read them out. And the other issue is I asked people online whether they can hear people who ask questions, and it was like the response was yes, but not very well. Okay. So perhaps also
for the questions from the room, we should
if you can repeat the question briefly.
So we got two questions.
Yeah.
Yes, one question from Ras Kella Wala, one of the, I must say for those who don't know, one of the most important Rastafari scholars since the 1980s and well-published Rastafari scholars since the 1980s. So Ras Kella is writing, Ras Kella Wala's name change is reminiscent of the injunction found in our traditional Nyabingi chant, the sentiment of which is attributed to Marcus Garvey. Do not accept a title from another race, they are only camouflaging you before your face. And then there's a question, can Ras Kella Wala comment on the extent of agreement among St. Lucia and Rastafari on the goal of returning to Africa during the 1970s and 1980s? One St. Lucian Rasta at that time, who was the head of the Ayanola Rastafari Improvement Association, Earl Bosket, is quoted as saying, unlike Jamaican Rastas, the St. Lucian Rasta does not want to return to Africa. How widespread was or is such a contending perspective among Rastafari in St. Lucia or the Eastern Caribbean for that matter? Give thanks, Ras Kella, for the question, thinking the same. I have noted down the same quote, and actually the quote continues because Earl Bosket said, because St. Lucian Rasta view Africa already, view St. Lucia already as Africa. So maybe even as an extension to that question, if St. Lucian Rasta also want to repatriate, maybe also that in that context of identifying St. Lucia itself already as Africa, maybe.
If I may make a comment, I know Dr. Olmuske very well. He knows the history of Rasta in St. Lucia, and he knows when all Rastafarian is prepared and want to repatriate to Africa, but Rastafarian has no repatriation more than a physical thing. And we are looking at repatriation more like a physical, spiritual, and a repatriation redemption. I myself have felt I have been repatriated from day one. I see Rasta, but physically I'm not in Ethiopia. So if we talk about repatriation, we have to really broaden up and make a very question mark what we define as repatriation, you know, because the Rastafarian itself, all Rastafarian is a repatriation to Africa movement.
But it also contains for yourself and also for the others the physical component, or do other Rasta, they all want to return to Africa physically and maybe are not able to, or is that not the priority for all?
Every individual have to answer this to themselves, because everyone knows where they want to be comfortable and work and be comfort. But when I speak of Rastafarian, I don't speak of Rastafarian on my own behalf, or else I would say to my own self, if I would be 40 years ago, I think of Africa, I would want to be there, but now I've been going there 4 times and I'm not living there. So living in Africa and it doesn't make your repatriation status an issue, you know, or not living there doesn't make your repatriation status an issue. I'm talking about the repatriation status of the Rastafarian in general, you know, and that's our motive. I don't want to be merciful in words and say, I think all Rastafarian is repatriating to Africa.
And so just also a quick follow-up on that. So when these places in St. Lucia were called Zimbabwe, Africa, Angola, it did not mean to stay in St. Lucia, but it, as you said, it meant still, it implied.
If we wanted to make St. Lucia Africa, every names, everything we could change into an African name, everything we could do like an African. If we would change the continent and bring to St. Lucia, we would change the world east to west. And you know, what we are trying to do is practice what we know to be practiced wherever you are as African.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for the question. Are there more questions from the audience?
Hi. Yeah, so my question, you mentioned a lot working with international organizations, Red Cross and so on. Do you think that these organizations, like the UN or the Red Cross, are genuinely set up to benefit St. Lucia, Africa, and other countries outside of the West? Do you think they're genuinely interested in our emancipation as it's fair? And do you think the exchange is fair in terms of what money you brought to them or what they as organizations were able to pay?
Just quickly to repeat the question, because we have the request from Zoom that the questions from the audience are not well heard. I try to repeat it as well as I can. The question was, since Ras Kella Wala has worked with international organizations, if he thinks these organizations have actually the best interests of Africa, African countries at heart. I think that is a good summary.
Yeah, okay. And thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much for the.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your question. And I will say, I don't want to say what I feel. Sometimes the things I feel are not suitable for my society. What I see is Red Cross and these organizations, they are doing a humanitarian job. Wherever they are doing it, whether in Africa, Europe, or Asia, Red Cross in general are doing a humanitarian work. If the countries like Ethiopia Red Cross or Austria Red Cross or any other country Red Cross is holding up to the interest of the people, I'm not too sure, but whatsoever they are doing something humanitarian, and whatsoever humanitarian needs to be done is very important. I would say to myself, I have become part of them because I thought I wanted to make an input, and they was the only organizations where I realized who patronize me and understand me and give me a chance and opportunity to make an input. Yeah, I can say all in all, yes, I think they are prepared or willing to, but it's we, the people that make the organization. Is what we do, is what the organization is. The organization without the people is not an organization. And it's we, the people that are making the ideas. So if Red Cross, the ideas of Red Cross International or whatsoever has given me a chance that I can give Red Cross an opportunity to show what I can do or whatsoever. So I believe whatsoever the opportunity is just given me alone, I'm satisfied with it. We provide me training and whatever capabilities that I need.
And I remember as you explained it to me that the way how you interacted with these organizations already in St. Lucia was basically them supporting, but you had the lead on what is done. They were basically just supporting what you were doing, like with Zimbabwe Roots Farm, but now also with your projects in Ethiopia. I think, if I remember correctly, it was your ideas and your own ideas that you tried to implement.
Yes, for example, when I came to Austria 2003, there was this important thing in Austria going integrated, like migrant integral, we are going intercultural. This word was very popular in the integration, migration, learn German, Deutsch, and you know. So in this time, I realized, well, okay, it's really so necessary to be at that time in that country, but more important that I should interact in the society, or else I don't want to be bored. I'm a person who feels very international. I'm a very revolutionary type of person. So even dealing with the Red Cross made me understand human beings a little much better because I was seeing things most times the way I want and not how others expected. So even dealing with human beings was a certain different training for me instead of just cutting the trees or planting them or destroying them. So dealing with human beings is a special art by itself, especially we can quarrel, we can get confused, we can get vexed, we can get disagree, we have malice among us. So because of human being training and resources, so we have to be very careful how we deal with a society. But how we deal with a society and how we wish to be is two different things.
Thank you. Any more questions from the audience? Now that you have the opportunity. Yes,
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, in terms of from the beginning, when the Rastafari, in your understanding, when you started, or decided to follow Rastafari, what, in terms of the local perspective, how people saw the movement, how it's developed now, in compare, what do you see in terms of how you're accepted? I mean, St. Lucia, Jamaica, wherever.
Just quickly to repeat the question again for the Zoom audience. The question was, how is Rastafari now viewed in St. Lucia, and how has that changed over time from how when Rastafari came on?
When for example, I personally, he asked me for what prompted me into the Rasta. What we grew up in a society where we didn't know this, and these people came with a new name. They start saying things. They start saying, "Don't do this and don't do that." So society was not accepted. We was not a part of society. Society refused our parents, and we ourselves refused society also. It was not just the people didn't want us to be who we wanted to be, but we didn't want to be together with them anymore. It's like a redemption. So it was very difficult for our parents to consider how a man grew up all his life, he has to shave his beard, he has to cut his hair, and suddenly he started wearing long hair like women. He stopped cutting his beard, and he used to eat all his nice meat and fish. He stopped eating that. He used to run girls all about. He don't want the girls anymore. So it's like, when you adopting new things or changes, people are very funny. Nobody likes to see changes or new things very easily until they learn and understand it. So we the Rasta, we was more or less adopting a new culture, and the new culture was something that was prohibited to our society. When we would talk about, forget about the Pope and don't go to church, we would say, do good, and we would criticize society, we would say no politician, we would say no election. All the things people grow all their life building up colonialism, we are trying to say stop that and bring this down. So we was a refused society. The people would stone us sometimes. They wouldn't, some parents wouldn't want their children to be at their home anymore. Once you go on that side, then you are outcast. You have to find your way. That's why most Rastaman had to go and live in the hills. They had to run away from Babylon, so-called, and go and hide for a rescue. Find a place where nobody could embarrass them. Because the only thing they wanted is their peace, and not so much in the society. They taught us to be good, and we never be good. So the Rastafarian was, but after a couple of years, I was surprised to see that our children couldn't go to school. In the early 80s, in the late 80s, we had children who was Rasta children with dreadlocks, who was teachers. I wouldn't have a job in the early 70s, 80s after dreadlocks. A couple of years after, I was wearing modern with a dreadlocks. You see, so after 10 years, after 7 years, the government, they had to oblige, because what we was doing was not any harm to nobody or anything that was really affecting society. It was just a new tradition that we couldn't accept and adapt. But as we was proving ourselves that we are not harmful as they believe, slowly but surely, we are human beings. So they're becoming liking us. They start seeing we're looking healthy, we're looking more beautiful, we're looking more lovely, we're talking more nicely. The girls start getting proud, we're calling them princess, The girls never get, the Rasta made every human being proud of themselves. So people, society had to accept it. Some of them by hypocrisy or by force, but we made our history and we proved to people that this cult is coming to stay, and it will be the last to come, and it was always the first.
And we have another question on Zoom, again from Ras Kella, Dr. J. Komiak. Can Ras Kella Wala comment on the extent of inter-island contacts related to Zimbabwe Roots Farm? For example, did this initiative in St. Lucia influence developments on other islands in the Eastern Caribbean? I immediately think of the same pattern developed by Meacha and Peacha in Guadeloupe, in which they retreated to the mountains and farmed as preparation to repatriate to Africa, which they then actually did, and now they are in Benin, West Africa. In the inter-island exchange, did Zimbabwe Roots Farm influence?
Zimbabwe Roots Farm influence was not so much to say, well, a lot of the countries adapted it, but every country in the Caribbean island where there was a Rastafarian community adapted the idea, because the idea was not just from Zimbabwe, it was just a natural, unique idea that all Rastafarian groups, and I'm sure there was groups of brethren in Dominik at that time, was doing their agricultural groups. St. Lucia had different groups. St. Vincent had a different brethren doing the agricultural community, because wherever the Rastafarian was, agriculture was the main backbone, main community or main substance way of living. You know? That was their income, and that's the way of life of Rastafarian.
And before you mentioned that even for the government, you were representing on agricultural issues to other islands. Did you then also have in these islands contact the Rastafari community there and with their agricultural projects?
Yes, I remember visiting Dominik. At that time, I met a group of brethren in the city, but they was telling me there was 3 different groups of brethren who had their agricultural plots. Yeah, but it was, they just had one representative representing 3 organizations. I was representing the National Farmers Association on behalf of Zimbabwe Roots Farm with the government.
Okay, thank you very much. Any more questions from the audience? We still have some time. Yes, please.
Thanks for this nice information. And I would like to ask, how was it in the beginning in Zimbabwe Roots Farm actually? Where you gather all your knowledge about farming, or some of the island had some experience with it, or was it learning by doing, or you had some experience from the parents, or because to start such a big project and keep it going is not easy, especially in the beginning, you know?
The question, again, for the Zoom audience, it was quite loud, but to make sure, how did Zimbabwe Roots Farm start? And for example, the education, the agricultural education, what the practical side of how it started?
Usually the brethren, like I said, the 3 founders of Zimbabwe Roots Farm, Ras Kella Wala, they grew up in an agricultural community area. King Khalid was very knowledgeable about plants, and he grew up in the community as a so-called agriculture, not agriculturist. He didn't have any degree whatsoever, but as a land person. We all together grew up and this village was always a very fertile area, and we had a lot of agricultural practices because we grew up in the community. Becoming Rastafarian, we had to improve on our knowledge because we wanted to check about diet. We want to practice agriculture in a formal way, like, you know, like where we would be accepted like government. And we wanted to be knowledgeable and not just doing home agriculture. We wanted to do what we call farming. So we start getting books, we start reading 1 or 2 magazines from Greenpeace. We start getting international agencies like Plenty, Canada will provide us some booklets. So we was well informed about organic farming. That's why we decided, okay, because we're doing natural, we used to call it natural farming. It's from them books we get to know about organic farming. Now we call it bio in Europe, you know, and things like that. But it's organic farming was the main word in the 80s, you know. And I was always interested in making it not just a practical thing, but like an institution, a researching center. So we start going in all ways and means where we could get information and make it like a educational thing, but not just a practical thing. So Zimbabwe idea was not just being a practical agriculture, but more or less like an institution for food preservation, technology, funding, helping organizations, structuring proposals. We was looking ourselves like a government managing organic farming. So because of that, I had to inform myself, and King Khalid was already well informed. And because of my international organization, working with community government, Red Cross, disaster management, I was in a lot of cultural youth groups and things like that. So I had the chance to inform myself about whatsoever I wanted. And because organic farming was a topic, I was well informed about it. And I didn't go to any high school, college, or anything. I learned most of my things in seminary, workshops, and projects like today and things like that.
Thanks.
And then you mentioned eventually you then even became teachers because you said you even worked with 5
High schools, yes, I was holding lectures and training them practically and theoretically in organic farming.
And even the purpose you said for that was that the schools themselves even become self-sufficient for their cooking.
Yeah, yes, at that time the schools had the feeding program and they could consume some of their products. They would grow as part of their food consumption meals and sell the rest. So the school was already making money on the agricultural products, which we was doing with them as a demonstration point. So it was just not just practical agriculture, it was just, we was trying to make it sustainable, economical, everything possible, you know.
We still have some time for questions. No further questions so far in Zoom. More questions from here?
Yes.
And then you Zimbabwe Roots Farm, you were basically preparing yourself and all the group to move to Africa and then provide again for food security, especially connect with the community and show them how it can be done. Or...
To tell you something, I find Zimbabwe Roots Farm was one of the best institutes I had a chance to visit or to take part in or to conduct or to coordinate. I'm not a coordinator of the Zimbabwe Roots Farm, but I had to play almost a one-man role show. I had to be doing all the film, a lot of the field work, and all the document preparation. I had to do the official visits. I had to do a lot of the things. But what I find very interesting in Zimbabwe Roots Farm was the brethren, and then they was willing to keep pushing whatsoever we wanted to do. There was never one time they feel worried or bored, or sometimes certain crops might fail, and we would feel like, you know, okay, a certain time, certain appointment won't keep up in time. So it was an institute for me where I learned a lot of tolerance, a lot of patience, and a lot of humbleness. Not just being a Rasta, but generally being an organizer in my society is not an easy thing at that time, especially with the Rasta. And I was able to do it, and they gave me the courage. And I had the courage to work with them, and I didn't feel that any of my time was being wasted. There are times I would be feeling left alone, but now when I sit here and I see you in front of me now, I have really realized I have been lost in, I have not been lost in anything at all.
Oh, sorry. Yes, we still have a little time. Any more questions?
And if anybody have any question, I might have a question on anybody, everybody there. What makes you interested in African history? Anyone can answer, or if anyone don't want to answer, I'm very happy.
Maybe those who study African history.
I would say mingling with Africans made me be interested in African history and African culture. Like the different prayers and with the dances with the African people in the scene, that's the humble people. And I like that, and I don't see that so often in Austrians. That's why I get interested in African culture. That's the reason why. Because I like it with their good people.
So to summarize again very soon, because basically you came in contact with people from Africa and that may be interested in. Yeah. We still have a little time left. Maybe then I have a last question, maybe to wrap it up and to round it up. Now, as we have seen, St. Lucia was mainly a Catholic country, which is interesting because it was at the end British colony, but still it stayed with Catholicism. I read in one of the census that 69% or so were Catholic during in the 1960s, or even more so. So how was that now, from really now the Rastafari perspective, choosing a Black African god, and why was that central for that, and what does that mean? Because you grew up in a Christian background, and now Rasta comes and turns all of this around and turns it on its head in a way. How was that for you yourself from this Catholic background, and for the people around it? Maybe you can.
You see, one thing with good or God or gladness, or what we would call the spiritual belief is the only thing one have for his own self, privately, secretly, whatsoever way we do it, whatsoever way we pray, whatsoever religion we call ourselves. But our inside belief, our godly, is the only thing we have for our own self. And from a Catholic background, religiously, we was always feeling like we want to be good people, you know. As Catholic, had some contrary concept towards the Rastafarian philosophy. And again, the Rastafarian philosophy was something new. We had to learn and adapt, which was new. And up to now, a lot of people do not accept certain things that is being said or being done, or how the Rasta look at the perspective of being Rastafarian. But the godly inside is always godly, and all of us have that godly part in ourselves. And being that Christian side of it, when the Rastafarian come, and with the vibe, we couldn't deny that. We had that feeling as if, yes, we have a little part of this Rastafarian vibe in us for sure. You know, they are saying good things for sure. Oh, they are the things they taste nice, you know. As if mostly all the things we would patronize, the things we would preach, the things we would talk about, are things that we ourselves from a religious background was already. Most of us who would eat meat would feel sad because we know the animal is, you know, and if the Rasta say don't eat meat, you could patronize them. If they would tell you, okay, love yourself as your neighbor, you would understand that too. If they would tell you, oh, stop stealing, you would, you know, all the good things they would say. These are the things that was also brought from the Catholic Church, whether we would practice Catholicism or not. But a lot of the good things they are preaching, we also already had it from the Catholic Church. So we just had to improvise and develop it and strengthen whatsoever they are bringing, and adapt from what we have from the Catholic and make whatsoever they say better to improve our God or our ways. So religiously, or yeah.
So basically, it was already there. You were already familiar with the Bible, but it gave it a different maybe spin.
Formula with the Bible would be a different way to say it, but formula with the words of God, you know. Formula with the words of good, you know, or the words of so-called your Allah, your master. I don't know how to call him. Every religion call him a different name. But that inner soul, that inner part of your belief that no one can take away, always have something where you can relate with the Rasta and see, oh yeah, I can relate with that also. You know, that's part of me. I have that good feeling too. You know?
And also that it was speaking of Africa.
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much for this great talk and the insights. And Ras Kella Wala is of course based in Austria, so there is possibility for many more talks even outside of the university for those who are interested to learn more about any of these subjects that we just briefly touched upon today. There is, of course, more possibilities, and Ras Kella Wala is a teacher, so it's always possibility for more teachings and sharing with people who are interested. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming out today, for asking questions, for participating, and also for those who are coming out on Zoom, quite internationally, as I saw. Also, thank you for asking questions, and yes, for appreciating also, as Rasta would say, appreciative of the presence of Ras Kella Wala today, as he said, 37 years later, from Zimbabwe Roots Farm, from being already on Austrian television, speaking at the University of Vienna. And we appreciate very much the insights you have shared, the knowledge you have shared, and hopefully for more times in the future. So please, everybody, give it up. And maybe a last word from Ras Kella Wala thyself, before we close the Zoom also.
I stand up, applause one more time. Thanks very much. I feel very great and proud to see you there. A message to the Rastafarian community. I realized I didn't want to make this discussion a Rasta discussion. I thought it was just history. But as I said before, history has to repeat itself and history has to live. So I realized the liberty of today is the Rasta has taken over the whole discussion. Sorry, my apology if anyone didn't feel pleased or satisfied with the things I say or displeased, my apology. I would like to say to all those who made an effort to be here today, thanks very much. And for the Rastafarian community, keep doing the good works. You're on the right path. The journey is long. The mission is long. It's not how fast you can move, it's how long you can last. Thank you very much.